Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to Rainbow Vision Now with host Betsey Lewis.
A radio show reaching beyond the limitations of our minds and beliefs into a world of inspiration and empowerment where the impossible is possible.
Call-ins are welcome at 347-637-2650. Betsey has 3 new books available now on Amazon and all internet bookstores. Angels, Aliens, and Prophecy 2, Mystic Revelations of 13, and a fictional book, Alexander Phoenix and the 7 Sacred Virtues. Be sure to check out Betsey's Earth News 1 blog and calendar of events on her website, BetseyLewis.com. That's BetseyLewis. And now, your host, Betsey.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show on this January 29th, 2014 evening. We've got a fascinating guest tonight. You've probably seen him on countless TV documentaries or heard him on well-known radio talk shows. That's John Hogue, who defines himself as a rogue scholar, and I'm going to have to find out what exactly that means. He is a world-renowned authority on Nostradamus and other prophetic traditions. He's a futurist, accurate forecaster in his own right, creator of the HogueProphecy.com website. John has received wide international recognition, appearing in over 100 television and 1,000 blog and talk radio shows on 5 continents, North and South America, Asia, Australia, and Europe. At present, he has predicted the winner of 12 out of 12 U.S. presidential elections and perhaps has the most multimedia exposure of any prophecy scholar in history, making frequent appearances on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, CNN International, BBC, Ancient Prophecies, The View, and many more. John has been a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie and BBC International Radio. And he currently lives on an island in the Pacific Northwest. And I want you to be sure and check out his website, and you can find out more about his books at HogueProphecy.com. And Hogue is spelled Hogue. So welcome to the show, John. Are you there, John? Hold on just a minute. I'll get him on the line here. Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Betsey.
Oh, great to have you on tonight. So tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit more, and why you call yourself a rogue scholar.
Well, the study of prophecy is really an unorthodox study of history, and history is actually a study of how we repeat things. And one of the sources of how we repeat things is how we educate our children to, in my opinion, become basically functional mediocrities in a rather limiting societal way of living. And every culture programs people collectively into different identities through their religions, through their racial identities that are imposed, all these things that are really part of the passing fancy of being an immortal shell. But none of the education that we have, that as I grew up in the system, really seemed to make me wise. It just gave me more intellectual bling with degrees dangling on it. So I decided, after I made the minimum requirement of my particular corner of the ego prison, the United States, that you had to have a high school diploma. So I said, okay, now I legally have one. I'm not going to pursue a university degree because I would rather let the Earth, this planet, be my university. So I struck out onto just learning and self-educating myself and trying to find techniques that would preserve me from thinking that intellectual bling is intelligence. And so I went on a path to study meditation, which also led to an awakening into a unique way of looking at what prophecy is. So I could say that I call myself the rogue scholar. It's a nice alliteration. I like alliterations. I have probably done enough study to have gotten a Rhodes Scholarship in England, but since I don't want to have my intelligence bound by the rules and doctrines and dogmas of others, I would prefer to be rogue. So that's why I call myself that.
Cool. So, John, you're in great company because Bill Gates he was a college dropout. Steven Spielberg is a dropout. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. So you're in good company.
And also Steve Jobs.
Oh, there you go. That's right. Absolutely. So, I happened to look up rogue in the dictionary, and it says an undisciplined person, a scoundrel, a playfully mischievous person. Are you that?
I couldn't write 24 books and be undisciplined.
True.
That brings up that is, dictionaries are often written by the idiots that go to college. And
very good.
And one of the things that people will find in my 24 books and counting is that I often go back to the original meaning of words and not the meanings that our illustrious but dusty pedantic teachers give us. For instance, give you an example. Rogue is actually a term that's given, like heretic, to people who don't stay on the mainstream path. A heretic is actually derives from the term that shepherds in the Middle East used to use for the sheep the individual sheep that would go off from the herd and go on their own. When you hear the word apocalypse, most of your de-education factory systems that are called universities and schools make everybody think that apocalypse means doom, gloom, retribution, the end of the world. But actually, if it was used properly by the Greek, as the Greeks intended the word to be used, it would actually mean something like enlightenment. It would be, you would say, Buddha sitting under his Bodhi tree had an apocalypse, a revelation. And so, but most people don't think of it that way. And in the same way, most people look at rogue as something negative.
That's right. Absolutely. I was kind of interesting. What sign are you? Are you a Sagittarius?
Well, I'll give you a strong hint, which
okay.
I'll say yes. What sign would tell it when asked that would say yes? With that kind of
well,
word?
Some people say stop sign, but so
no,
interesting.
What people in a astrological sense? I mean, Linda Goodman used to write about this all the time. She was wonderful in making conversational, a lot of deep astrological ideas. Okay, we don't have the time, so when somebody says yes, with a bedroom voice, you know you're talking to a Scorpio.
Ah. Okay. The reason I asked is
those.
one of those. Well, I know Scorpios. Yes. Scorpios. Yes, indeed. Now, I think you and Nostradamus have a lot in common, and I was kind of curious that I felt that maybe this past life connection with Nostradamus. Do you sense that?
I will eventually write a book on reincarnation. I would contend some rather original views about that that I've gleaned over. I was on a path for 10 years to break out of the one you live one life and then are judged and go to heaven or hell syndrome that half the world seems to be programmed to believe. And I have to add that the word belief which everybody just takes as some virtuous word, I consider a very unvirtuous word, because it really underneath means I qualify my entire spiritual life on ignorance. Somebody tells me it's so, and I blindly believe them. That Jesus is my only begotten Savior, or that Muhammad is the last prophet, or equally the atheist who believes there's nothing. That's also a religion. So if I'm actually going to find out what really it is, I have to go beyond belief and actually see that any belief I hold that's not tested and explored intimately is the point where I stop my search. So reincarnation has a lot of those dogmas in it. And so if you get out of the dogma of the idea of, well, I only have this one life, and then if I don't make it, then I go to heaven or hell. And if I happen to be born in the wrong religion, I'm going to hell anyway. I'm thinking, now if God really is like this, God is a psychotic. So I'm thinking this sounds more like men writing scriptures that not only do they project their own limits and call it God, but they also seem to deny women equal rights in the spiritual path. So it just smelled of men being misogynistic and calling it spiritual and writing scriptures. So with that in mind, I studied reincarnation, and without those blinders on, I discovered a lot of things. One of the things I'll say is that in the process of past lives, I'll say this, that if you were a famous person, you have an opportunity, because there's a historical record of your life, to see how you've probably done a lot of the same things you're doing today, and you've attained all the dreams and goals that you deeply desire today. You might find out that if you're a famous person, that you had the love of your life, a legendary love story, and then you have to ask yourself, well, then why am I still chasing after it? It did not fulfill me. Here I was with a soulmate, and everything was wonderful, but why am I now seeking that again? So if one is blessed by having a famous past life, if you utilize it rightly rather than to feed your conceit, but to actually see all the mistakes you made in that past life. I mean, just hypothetically speaking, what if you found out you were Richard Wagner, and you go, wow, I wrote all that beautiful music, but I also was a raging anti-Semite, and you're Jewish. You know?
Okay.
You have to kind of bear that burden, or you understand something deeper, that there are no burdens that you can bear, and there's no right karma that can solve wrong actions. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about good and bad karma. You have to simply get off the wheel of samsara, and understanding karma is what a lot of the Eastern mystics that I sat with, like Osho, Krishnamurti, and others that I actually sat with in India, in the case of Osho, who I knew since 1980 until he died in 1990, what he used to say really blew my mind about reincarnation, because he said, enlightenment doesn't reincarnate. It's already there. It is already the truth. How could this truth need to go through illusion? So what you're actually going from life to life through is bundles of ego and mind and identification. And at a certain point, it's almost like a wave that continues to rise and fall on the surface of a vast ocean. And just by the whims of the winds that are buffeting the wave, it takes on a shape. And then it starts to think, I am this shape. I am a wave separate from the ocean. But what Osho made me understand about reincarnation is all these waves that you are and all the other waves that you see rising and falling that are others is a misunderstanding, is an illusion. You're the ocean. When you're rising as a wave, when you're declining as a wave, and dying as a wave, you've ever been the ocean. And so if one can not just hold on to that and turn that into a belief, but just go deeper than just the intellectual construct I just made, like half your audience now is going, oh, now I understand everything. No, I just gave you a picture of a rice cake, as the Zen mystics say, And you can't eat a picture of the rice cake. You have to have the real rice cake. So, and that goes deeper than the intellectual understanding. As Gurdjieff would say, you have to understand with your whole mass, your body, your mind, and your heart, and your whole attention.
So, John, I'll take that as that you did have a connection with Nostradamus, and we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, there is a connection. I will say that,
yes.
But I will also say that even if you, as I do, it will show in this book, I spent 10 years documenting a minor historical character that I wrote down everything I knew about him before I started this search. And I even knew what he looked like. He looked just like me, with curly hair and the same thin jaw, the same kind of thick body. But he was a French general in Napoleon's army, and it took me a long time because he was a minor general. I found his portrait. He looked just like me, and all the things that I saw and knew about him, which I tested, were true, documented in his life. So I know that I was that person. But in the revelation of knowing that, I also know I've never been that person, because that's why half the world believes you live one life, because you really do live one life. The life you're living now as Betsey is never going to happen again.
Right.
But you've also commingled and brought together personalities in other lives, too. Mm-hmm. And yet, you're neither this life or those lives. You're the ocean.
Exactly. Now, John, when did you first realize you had the gift of prophecy, and do you use astrology for your predictions?
Well, I've discovered through deep study of Nostradamus that mundane or political astrology is very helpful in sort of architecturally providing a temporal foundation for the cycles of repetitive history, because they do follow astrological cycles quite remarkably. Unfortunately, perhaps, quite mechanically. For instance, so I use a lot of astrology in my books, more so even now as I evolve these books. For instance, the last few books I've been talking about the transit of Pluto, and how a lot of the things that happened roughly 250 years ago when Pluto was transiting Capricorn are happening again today, even with the same names. Back then, there was a Tea Party rebellion, a tax rebellion that led to a revolution in America. Today, we have another Tea Party group just when Pluto went back into transit into Capricorn in 2008, 2009, and 10, which arose as the Tea Party movement. Whether one supports it or not, there's parallel. We had the emerging of modern middle classes in Europe and American colonies, or the British colonies in America at that time, 250 years ago. Now, those current middle classes are in a midlife crisis, but they are surrounded all around the world, especially in Asia, by the emergence of new middle classes. So there's a cycle of middle class evolution that often runs up against a new form of aristocracy. And back then it was aristocracy of royalty and blue bloods and by birth. This time it's by your bottom line. It's an aristocracy of wealth. It's more a plutocracy, what I call the CE oligarchy, that is trying to redefine politics and power in the world. And just like 250 years ago, they profit from the emerging middle class, but they don't like the freedom of the emerging middle class. They want to support it, suppress it, as they are wanting to do in Beijing and in other places, and even here in America. And then eventually what happens is the people push back. And then you, usually at the end of the Pluto cycle, which in this time will be 2024, you then enter the Aquarian Pluto transit, which in the last time that happened, you had the French Revolution. You had actually triggered the century of revolutions, which was the 19th century. That's happening again.
So we're in a repetitive cycle pattern, which we've been doing for ages and ages, which you talked about, but which is crazy. And it seems like we just can't get out of those cycles and those patterns. We just keep repeating the past.
calling it the future. And thus, ergo,
right.
is the essence of my work for the last 30 years, is to help people understand that the formula to break out of this pattern, because you see, now all the collective prophecies of the world, which I often publish in my books, and people can see all my books at HogueProphecy.com. I'm often writing since 1986. I've been often writing about how what is the fuel, what is the motive force that keeps us repeating the past and calling it the future, to a point now where if we continue on this syndrome, we are going to see the human civilization go very soon past a point of unsustainability. And that's also been foreseen collectively by many prophets. They have seen the climate change coming. They have seen the rising of the oceans and the overheating of the great droughts across our central plains and things. It is amazing how I've collected thousands of prophecies in my journeys around the world, from different native groups, from the more traditional groups. When I look at the Judeo-Christian disciplines, I try to look beyond the dogmas, as I do with the Buddhists and the Hindus and their prophecies, and Nostradamus as well, which I'm best known for. But really, the mass of collective prophecy is foreseeing our breakdown ahead of us, not too far into the future. Into the 2020s, it really begins. And so my work is also an attempt to actually help my readers understand what they need to do to break the syndrome, because it cannot be collectively broken. Because when people act in masses, they usually act towards their more unconscious natures, because mass mobs and crowds tend to feed the sleepwalking human state of semi-consciousness. You never see armies of Buddhas or Jesuses or Krishnas. These people, or Rabias and Miras, these mystics always are alone. And it makes me think that individual enlightenment, that enlightenment is individual, and unconsciousness in us is collective. So the strange thing now is to understand how each of you listening to this can see your significance rather than follow the way the society has trained you to see yourself as insignificant. And my solution to that, as a walking, talking experiment of this since 1980, is to be a follower, a practitioner of the art of self-observation, the science of self-observation, meditation. And so my answer in my books always comes back to the same thing. It is your personal transformation that is more important than the collective. We're seeing things upside down. The human race on the collective cannot be altered. Only you can understand what you're seeing is a misperception, and through your own inner understanding, see it clearly. And from that understanding, that awakens your intelligence to then contribute in your life and to the life around others and in the world intelligent solutions and answers to the problems. And so what we need is to consider through meditation how insignificant we are. And I mean in with a big I-N, not insignificant, but insignificant we are. And that we should celebrate life in its insecurity. Because if it's just insecurity, because it's in our egos and stuff, it is a difficult life. But if meditation is working in its insecurity, you are in security of being able to witness the world from that point which is not touched by it, that point of understanding which is eternal. That wave suddenly remembers it's the ocean. So that's fundamentally what all my books are about.
John, let's talk about Nostradamus and a little bit more about him. He was born on December 14th, 1503, and he was very mystical. He wrote in quatrains. Tell us about that. He was Jewish, and then he converted to Catholicism. Exactly what was he all about, and why did he write these quatrains? What are they all about?
Well, first off, he was born of a family of Jews in Provence in 1503. But to put it correct, they converted before he was born. So he was born living and being brought up living the secret life of Jewish mysticism and Jewish astrology in particular, plus being Christian. And he was a devout Catholic, even though he was born Jewish. But he was a Catholic of the little c variety, the ones that understand the Greek that the Catholicus comes from in the Latin, which means universal. That means that God is a universal force. Now, there's the big C Catholics who often run the Vatican who want to take their narrow dogma and force the whole universe to go through it, cram through their narrow dogma. And that's the big C Catholic. So he was little c, first off. Secondly, Nostradamus was, he's known, just like I'm known for being an interpreter of Nostradamus, and few people know about all the other things I do. Nostradamus was a very busy man, had many other talents, and prophecy was just one facet of his work. He was a proto-botanist. He was like an early form of plant studier. He was a herbalist. He was a pharmacist. He was a culinary gourmet cook. He made a living later in life as a maker of cosmetics, of medicines. He was a best-selling author of almanacs for planting and predictions of each year. He was also wrote a famous treatise, Des Fardamens, a treatise on pharmacists, which in it is a travelogue of many of his travels through Italy, France, Spain, where he picked up recipes for different things. And also a section of it is about his near single-handed fight to eradicate the Black Death from Aix-en-Provence, which was the capital of Provence, back in 1546 into 47. But then in later life, he married again. He had a tragic loss of his first wife and their two children, Agen, when he was living there. He couldn't save them from the plague because it perhaps wasn't the plague. It was perhaps because the city, including Nostradamus, often complained about the foul humors coming from the swamps around the city. In that time, he mistook those foul humors and smells of the swamps to be a plague. It was probably mosquito-borne malaria. And so his children and his wife died of malaria. Of course, he was maligned for that. They thought, okay, he's converted Jew, he looks Jewish, he's converted Jew, he's dealing with some sorcery. So he was called to the Church of Fathers in Toulouse, neighboring Toulouse, to explain himself. He vanished for 6 years. He just literally rode out of town on his mule and what he could carry on his mule, and then kind of vanishes roughly for 6 years. A lot of apocryphal stories about what he did in that period. One of my favorite apocryphal stories could be true, but I don't know. Is he's walking on a road in Italy, and there's these monks, Franciscans, coming the other way, and suddenly he stops and he sees this monk at the end of the line, and he bows. He puts his knees in the muddy earth and bows before this man, and they're all looking at this guy who's the new novice Franciscan monk who was a swine herder. And they're saying, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "I have to bend the knee to His Holiness," Nostradamus declared. That man, 40 years later, that young man became Pope Sixtus V.
Wow. What a story.
So, yeah, there are many stories. Actually, in my book, Nostradamus, A Life and Myth, which if you go like my Facebook page, you'll see some beautiful cover of the book. If you go to Amazon and write in Nostradamus, you'll probably see it. I have just reissued it 510 years after his birth, December 23rd, and now it's a Kindle book, and it's updated the afterlife timeline is updated, because it looks not just at his life. Nostradamus had two lives. I call it Nostradamus a life and myth, because he actually also encompassed all the forms of what that word myth means, from charlatans all the way up to myth being a higher essential truth rather than mere historical fact. I mean, to give you an example, a lot of people go to sleep in their history classes listening about factual history, but you probably will learn more about the human condition and what human beings are capable of doing by reading Tolkien and reading the journeys of Frodo and Sam, or seeing the Lord of the Rings movie. That's myth. Myth always gives you the perennial, essential lessons of, honor, heroism, sacrifice, love, trust, innocence. I mean, that's a story of heroic innocence, and how the two hobbits go and get the ring back into the crack of doom, and all the things that nine people, dwarves and hobbits had to do to work together to make that possible. Without any one of those nine, it would never have happened. So it's also a mythological story about how we need to work in community to solve our problems. And I often think the myths are a greater teacher of history. And I'm saying this as a lover of history, and my books are steeped in history. But I've come to the other side of it to see that the better way to tell the story about a man who was also aware of the importance and power of myth, Nostradamus. Looking at his life and wondering why there's so much material on Nostradamus, why hasn't there been like a 400-page biography written about him?
Right.
And so I proceeded to write one in 2003, and when he was 500-year anniversary, I did it for HarperCollins in London. And when I got in the middle of it, I discovered, my God, I have to go back and start again, because the reason why nobody's taken this material and put it together is you cannot separate Nostradamus' facts about his life from his myth. So I reconstituted the concept of the story to make it a journey through fact and myth, and produced the book. And now I hope your listeners will check it out, because it is the only and first full-bodied biography on the life of Nostradamus. If it were in paper, it would be about 450 pages.
Sounds great. Let me ask you one question. I watched a movie where Nostradamus was saving lives from the Black Plague, or also the bubonic plague, and he was using roses to cure them with. Have you ever read anything like that?
In the book, I have the recipe actually in the book. It was the rose lozenges. These are in his Treatise des Fardamens, his best-selling travelogue. There's a section that, even despite the controversy about him being a prophet, that French literature still considers his narrative about his single-handed fight against the plague in Aix-en-Provence. And that's where he has the lozenges. They were basically just breathalyzers. Nostradamus, this is the thing, it's important to get deep into the biography of him, is that Nostradamus, a lot of myths are false about Nostradamus. Like, a lot of people think, he saw the future, how to heal things, so he was a great healer because he took some secrets from the future and used them in his time. And it's an understandable, logical process to make that conclusion, but it's not true. What Nostradamus was actually a conservative. He was such a passionate classicist that he really did use the ideas of Hippocrates and Galen, the early founders of medicine, and he followed them to a T. And some of those ideas of the ancients are good even today. And they may not have known that germs cause disease, but they did know that being clean, that when plagues happen, there were always rats around, so the logic is kill the rats. It's important to keep people at home and not to huddle in masses, because it seems people get sick more and more when they're together. The people were very close to understanding, actually, even as far back as the 1st century BC, that there were germs. There was a person I talk about in the book who's a Roman doctor who wrote a treatise that survived the Dark Ages, where he theorized that he believed that it wasn't the humors of the body, the water, the ether, the catarrh, all these different humors that are part of the body that makes us sick when they're out of balance. That's the basic, in a very simple, quick way of describing Nostradamus' medical understanding in the Renaissance. But he also said, I'm sure Nostradamus read the treatise, that there's specks in the air maybe that cause people to get sick that are so small we can't see them. And he's talking about, so people had an idea about germs as far back as the 1st century BC, but it was only Louis Pasteur who discovered them. And then here comes the interesting conundrum about this, because one of the most famous fulfilled prophecies of Nostradamus is about volume 1 of his work, his magnum opus, The Prophecies, the Prophéties, which he serialized in 1555 through 1560. Later after his life, about 2 years after his life, it was all serialized editions, which I have all of them, the originals, copies of the originals, were put into a book that we now know as the one book that has all of his works, and it's called The Prophecies. And in it, he basically describes in the first volume, in a 4-line poem, he said, the thing long ago forgotten shall be rediscovered by Pasteur. This will take place during the current grand lunar cycle. He will be considered a demi-homme, a half-god figure, but by rumors fouler than farting he shall be discredited. Now, there's only 2 times in Nostradamus' prophecies that the word pastor, which means shepherd in Latin, is used. The only other time it's the pastor of Rome. So clearly he's talking about the Pope, a Pope in the future. But this one has, if you don't understand how to get into the mystery of his code, you wonder, that just sounds like gobbledygook, except Pasteur does sound like a historical figure. There was Louis Pasteur. So there's a lead. You think, okay, was there anybody named Pasteur? Yes, Louis Pasteur. And the thing long ago forgotten that was rediscovered by Pasteur, well, we know that he discovered that germs cause disease. And he created immunization and pasteurization, like in milk. So the secret long ago forgotten rediscovered Pasteur would be maybe Louis Pasteur. Is there any link? Well, there is. The grand lunar cycle, that's why you got to know your political astrology, because the grand lunar cycle that Nostradamus is talking about started in 1535 and ended in the year 1889. So then the next detective step is, did anything happen with Louis Pasteur in 1889? Yes, he created and founded the Institut Pasteur, where they went further into making immunization drugs and things happening. That happened. Did he have a nickname? Yes, he was called demi-homme. The Encyclopedia Britannica of the time used to call him the half-god, Pasteur the half-god. So, again, fulfilled. Now, the last line is the hardest one to fulfill. And for many years, I couldn't find an answer to it until 1995, when a scholar republished Pasteur's notes and discovered from his own handwriting that he had lied about using his tests on animals. He actually almost exclusively tested his vaccinations on poor homeless children. And
horrible.
Therefore, he was, rumors foul as farting, he was discredited. So that gives you a journey into...
I wanted to ask you about one of his quatrains that really fascinates me, and it's 9-83, about the sun, 20 of Taurus, so strong earth trembles, the great theater full will be ruined, the air, sky, and earth obscured and troubled when the infidel God and saints will proceed under sail. Is that talking about Rome and maybe the Catholic Church, the Vatican?
Well, it's always important to have the right translation, and it always amazes me after doing this for 30 years how that's a pretty close translation. It still has some flaws, But there are people who literally made a living writing books on Nostradamus who can't even read Renaissance French. They've been relying only on English translations, often spurious English translations, and they've made a whole career writing about Nostradamus without ever learning all the possible ways that you can use old and modern French, because you can't deny that he might have understood the modern application. One of the other very common things that happens is that people will look at something like bloody alus sanguinaire, or bloody alus. It's related to the Middle East. Everybody wonders who Alus is, A-L-U-S. And the key is you have to understand, you have to know what Nostradamus knew. You have to know the classics. You have to know that people in the Renaissance loved classical metaphors. So you follow that path. The other thing you follow is that people make this strange, obvious mistake, and they seem to be completely blind to it. I constantly, every day, get people asking me, they say, this is what he means, and they give me English. And I'm saying, Nostradamus never spoke English or thought in English. So if you want to unravel a anagram, you have to unravel it in French or Latin or Greek or Occitan or Provençal. And it's amazing how witless this is, even with people who publish Nostradamus books. For instance, alus, I'd take one look at that and look at it as from French point of view, it means le USA. Because the one thing missing in the prophecy, because it very much sounds like a prophecy about what happened in Iraq, because he has a couple prophecies about a crusader army in Mesopotamia, which is the ancient name of Iraq, and that the law of the enemy, which is the people they're occupying, the Sharia, would be victorious. So for years I've been saying this war is going to, in fact, I anticipated it on Coast to Coast AM 2 years before it happened, said we're going to go to war in Iraq, it's going to be a quagmire, we're going to lose. And I said if it was during the time of the presidential conundrum with whether Gore or Bush won Florida. And on the 15th of November 2000, I was on Coast to Coast AM, it's all documented, and they asked me, what would be the future potential of an Al Gore presidency, and what would be the future potential of a George W. Bush presidency? And I said the Al Gore I talked about, but then I went to George W. Bush and said, this man will probably get us in 2 years into his first term into a major war in the Middle East, most likely with Iraq. He will quickly depose Saddam Hussein, but in the occupation he will actually create another Vietnam in the desert. And that all happened because not only my own intuition, but also looking at these prophecies. So le USA, sanguinaire, is the bloody USA. It's an acronym, USA, with L, which is abbreviated for the USA. That's Alice. So, back to the infidel. You have the Christian saints in there. If I prompt up the prophecy, you'll notice that the famous May 10th prophecy, by the way, those degrees of Taurus usually happen around May 10th and 11th. The prophecy doesn't help as much because it doesn't actually tell us what day, what year it's going to happen. And often Nostradamus will give us the day, but not the year. So we don't know if that's when. So every May, almost on clockwork, somebody digs this prophecy up every May. And I even went on TV in L.A. back in 1987 when there was such a conundrum about it that people thought that there was going to be the big earthquake. It was going to hit L.A. Right. And I was Griffith Park Observatory saying, no, it's not going to happen. So what was the number again? What was the index number of that?
Hold on, 9-83.
9Q83. Okay.
Once you answer that, can we kind of switch gears in a few minutes and go to some prophecies? Because I know you got to run at the top of the hours. Okay, great. Go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, so, the translation I would use is the sun in 20 degrees Taurus, there will be a great earthquake. The great theater full up will be ruined. darkness, and trouble in the air, on the sky and land, when the infidel calls upon God and the saints. Now, infidel means unbelievers, but it could also apply to the Muslims as well. But it certainly means that there could be some great earthquake, but it's not made clear when. And what I would simply say is, maybe 3 people thought it was going to happen because Quatrain 83 looked like it was going to be there. But basically, it's really not going. We won't really know. Some 10th or 11th of May between now and 3797 may see a stadium full up of people or a theater full up of people collapse in a great quake. So if that happens, then we'll have some fulfillment understanding of that. But briefly, I want to talk about one that is very much pertinent to our time right now.
Go ahead.
And that is Quatrain 44 of Century 9, which talks about, I believe that we're finally going to see one of his mysterious enigmatic words, Raypoz, R-A-Y-P-O-Z, may actually be coming close to being fulfilled. We'll know the mystery or the secret of this prophecy because it focuses on Geneva, and it focuses on a failed effort for peace. And Raypoz is actually an anagram for Osirak, the name of the Iraqi reactor program, which was destroyed by Israel in 1981.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of, in a greater extent, it's Islam getting the atomic bomb. So, and one has to add that Nostradamus was an Islamophobe. So because of the Saracens, which were the terrorists of his time in their ships, the Barbaries, who were often raiding his homeland of Provence in South France. So the prophecy reads, leave Geneva, everyone. Saturn will change wealth to weapons. Those against Raypoz will be exterminated. Before the invasion, the heavens will show signs. Now, what I find burningly important in this is that Syria and Iran both are issues at Geneva, which is the UN base in Europe. This is where peace efforts are currently undergoing to stop civil war in Syria and to prevent what I have written a whole book about, Nostradamus, the War with Iran, Islamic Prophecies of the Apocalypse, which is also available on my website at Amazon.com. I have been writing and updating that book since 2007 because it is Nostradamus comes right out into the clear, talks about Strait of Hormuz in the terms that were used back then. The Arabian Gulf was his version of what people called in the 16th century the Persian Gulf. He is describing Persia in a war with what sounds like Western powers in the Persian Gulf, where ships are melted and sunk. And it is altogether a disaster of a war for the people of the West that makes the plans. He shows in his astrology when they were making the plans. The neoconservative movement has been planning this war since 1992, and each successive president becomes a convert, as Barack Obama seems to. But he's also mentioned as the Black King in the prophecies, and the date of his inauguration, where he made his first speech in his first term, a month after that, the astrology that Nostradamus describes this president with says that he also has a destiny to be a peacemaker. And so I've been writing that, looking at the astrology, I've been saying, and it's documented for years now, that 2014 would be the year when peace might suddenly, out of the blue, be possible through negotiations. But there's, on all three major combatant sides, Israel, America, and Iran, there are forces that are misguidedly predicting their doomsday prophecies, misreading them, who want this war to happen. And literally, they expect the enemy to be annihilated. They don't understand that when you're in a war of annihilation, usually everybody gets a little annihilated. And so there are forces that want this war to happen, and now we have a chance for peace. And this prophecy about Raypoz is that force that wants to see that extremism, religious extremism, as laden in the Iranian Revolutionary Guards as well as in Islam, but also in Israel, they have their own messianic fever that is arising because of a number of signs that have shown that this is the time to build the third temple, which is very important in the final stages for the Armageddon to happen. You also have a very strong Christian right influence, even though this President Obama is much more secular. The previous president, which worked very hard to have this war with Iran after Iraq, literally believed that he was talking to God and actually talked to the French president about biblical prophecy. And so you had also the former Iranian president who used to invoke the coming of the reappearance of the 12th Imam, which is in Islamic apocalyptic prophecy. He used to say that before the United Nations in Farsi, and no one ever commented on it on the mainstream news that he was actually saying, "I invoke and hope that basically the apocalypse is coming, we'll take back Jerusalem." So there's a lot of apocalypse fever going on with this war, and Nostradamus hates it. He's more in the clear that I've ever seen him since the French Revolution prophecies about naming names, dates. So it's a big deal, and it's just around the corner of time for us. So
there's so many crazy things going on right now, John, and I want to know what you think. Is there a spiritual war taking place between good and evil right now, and maybe with dimensional beings? What do you think? No,
that's a misunderstanding, I would say, if you ask. What's going on, if you ask me, is personification itself is evil, if you're going to use good and evil. If you're seeking, I wrote a whole book called Nostradamus and the Antichrist, which looked at his fascinating prophecies about, he's the only prophet in history who saw 3 antichrists. The first he called Paul Néoloran, which is an anagram for Napoleon Roi, Napoleon King. The second he called Hister, which is the ancient name of the river Danube. It so happens that Hitler grew up on the shores of the Danube River. The third is called Mabus, M-A-B-U-S, and that often translates into a number of people in the Middle East, or those who fight people in the Middle East, and it comes down to 4 candidates that are very intriguing: Saddam Hussein, George W. Bush, Osama bin Laden, and Barack Obama. All are the top candidates for this Mabus. Now, in a short time, I can't go into. If you want to know more about how their names decode, just go to my website and click on the links on Mabus, and it'll take you to the page where you can see how each of these men, using certain anagram rules Nostradamus used, for instance, Saddam Hussein was, you do a reverse mirroring of letters and the word, and it's a reverse image. Mabus becomes Sudan, Saddam. So anyway, but in the book, I ended it changing complete course. I went through the whole search of the personification, a search that I've been on for 25 years as a kind of a sleuth-sayer, if you will, rather than a soothsayer, a detective of trying to anticipate who the next great man of evil would be. And but in the end, the real Antichrist is not these people. I say in the book, get up from this moment with this book, put down your e-tablet, put down your book, walk into the bathroom, look into the mirror, and I will show you the Antichrist. It is not the person you see in the mirror. It is the mind that interprets what you're seeing in the mirror. The Antichrist, and I call the Antichrist unconscious. It is the mode. Now we're back to what we were talking about in the beginning of the show. The motive force that makes us robotic, predictable, perpetuating a misery force field on this planet is the way in which we've accidentally got ourselves stuck in the groove of personifying things, of believing things, of living our lives actually upholding our ignorance rather than testing it. And all these things create the patterns of the motor of prophecy being predictable, the motor that is driving us now to a point where we can no longer, because we're growing in numbers and the way we use the planet and its climate, we're reaching a point where if we continue to roll along like we are going to see our civilization collapse. So the real Antichrist to understand is the Antichrist unconscious. And any act that you have, if you ask me what is good, consciousness is good. If you ask me what evil is, unconsciously living. That always leads to evil.
Interesting. Well said, John. Interesting. So let me throw out Pope Francis to you, or Pope 13 as I call him. Is he the compassionate, humble, reforming Pope that most people believe he is, or are we going to see another side of him?
I think he's another divine accident. Every once in a while, the machinery that creates the power system that runs the Vatican makes a mistake. The last time they did this was with John Paul I, who, of course, they eradicated the problem by mysteriously poisoning him about a month after his pontificate. They can't do that again with Francis, because I consider Francis to be of the same cloth as John the 23rd and John Paul I, Cardinal Luciani. And I wrote a book, The Last Pope, which looked at the prophecy. It's also been the first full-bodied examination of the 400-page book of the prophecies of St. Malachi. I am going to this year update it and comment on Francis because he may be the last pope in the list. Petrus Romanus is the code. And so the assessment is, it's interesting the way that might go, because this pope is breaking a lot of the traditions. One of them being that he doesn't want to be called pope, he likes to be called Bishop of Rome. So if he creates a tradition where popes don't call themselves popes, then if they become bishops of Rome, he is the last one to be called a pope.
Sure.
So that's one way you could
read it. That makes sense.
The other way you could read it is that, and you see, he's in the code of 111 Latin mottos, which are codes for who this person is. He's the final one in the list that was rediscovered in 1595, or was actually written under the name of St. Malachi by some mystery prophet who I must say, after publication, before publication, everything from the 1100s is almost perfect. You can find an answer for every pope in the book. When the last 36 are left for where he can't sneak it in, because it's not hindsight anymore, he's 80 to 90% accurate, which is one of the most accurate trends I have ever seen. So there's a significant prophet behind whoever this mystery man is who calls himself St. Malachi from the 1590s. And it's the last pope may actually not be the next one after Benedict, the previous pope. It may be that the prophecy jumps to the final pope of the final days and for some reason ends the count, because they're all numbered up to the last pope, ends it with the man that clearly in the prophecy was going to start the apostasy of the church, Benedict. And that was, we don't have time to go, and we may go deeper into that in another show. But basically, he is the pope of the apostasy, the crisis in faith of the Catholic Church. So the numbering ends on him, may mean that whatever comes next, the prophecy jumps to the final one, and it could be the next, or it could be 100 popes from now. Interesting.
Well, John, I know we just have a few more minutes, but I wanted to have you give out all your information, where people can buy your books and where they can obtain your 2014 predictions. Go ahead and let them know.
Yes, you can find all of my works by going to HogueProphecy.com. And you will, that's HogueProphecy.com. You can go there, or you can like me on my Facebook page by just typing in John Hogue. And it'll say Prophecy Scholar will prompt up. When you see that and the John Hogue on the list, that's me. And if you like that page, you'll be able to get all the information you need on the books. And if you go to the website, you'll see full pages on every book I've written, as well as my Hogue Prophecy Bulletin, which I write article streams about 3 to 4 times a month that deal with current events and how prophecy looked at beyond their dogmas relates to them. And predictions for 2013 is out right now, and that looks at not only at these 2 years, which is an important point for reform, the year we just ended and the year we've just entered. But if we do the right things in these 2 years, the next 28 years could be a lot softer blows. It could be a much better way than it's looking like it's going to go now. So it looks at the economic crisis and the things that are happening, the potential for a greater depression that's being masked by this current improvement of the economy, which is actually another boom-bust bubble of the fiat economy. And many, many other things. It's that book is 130,000 words long. Actually, the donor's version for 1250 is has an extra chapter, which is chapter 13, which is all about the Hopi prophecies of the Blue Kachina and the final warning. That only can be gotten by, yes. Just check out my website and look at the books. And predictions for 2014 will be out on the 31st for the donors with the expanded version on Stormberger, who is this fascinating prophet who's one of the most clear prophecies ever written. Is actually going to have its 100th anniversary of fulfillment on August 1st of this year. This is the man that a cowherder who in the 1770s saw an iron road through his field in Bavaria and described where it was and said there'd be an iron horse on it. And when the road was made, when it was made to work, that day would start a war of 2 times 2 years, where strange forces of the earth, of the air, and they fight in the air like birds and do these things. And he's talking about World War I, which happened on August 1st when a train track was opened, exactly where he said it would be opened, on August 1st, 1914, when World War I began.
Amazing.
And what's important about World War I and this 1914 is, I call it a time when history's water broke. It's a time where then there was a travail of birthing a new era, and it kind of came out stillborn. So we're now in 2014, 100 years later, we're about to start a 4-year period where history's water is going to break again and create another century of contractions in an attempt to create a new era, an Aquarian age, and a new humanity. And so it's a very portentous time that we're in. So I hope that your listeners will check out my works, and especially predictions for 2014.
Oh, I'm sure they will. And thank you so much. What a great show and what great information you have. It's just fascinating. I'd love to get you back on the show sometime when you have a chance, and we can go over some more predictions and maybe about timelines, if we can change things, or are we, just part of destiny?
We can always change things. We can always change. 30 years of prophecy scholarship has proven to me that there's no history, future or past written in stone.
Cool. Well, that's what I believe, too. Well, thank you so much, John. You've just been a great guest, and I want to thank everybody out there for joining the show tonight. That concludes our show, and be sure and check out my website, BetseyLewis.com. Betsey is BetseyLewis.com, and I have my Earth News One blog, which has everything that's going on, UFO reports, just everything, solar events, earthquakes, so be sure and check that out. And thank you again, everybody. Until next time, keep those rainbow visions in your heart. Bye, John. Thanks again.
Bye. Thanks for having me, Betsey.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.